We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Amud Aleph in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 40a. And the previous Amud, the Gemara brought a Brisa, and the Brisa said that if a Nazir shaves his head, it doesn't matter if he uses a razor or any other kind of removal of the hair, that is going to be a violation of the prohibition of a Nazir shaving his head. And so the Brisa asked, if that's the case, why does the pasuk say tar if it doesn't have to specifically be with a razor? Why does the pasuk say a razor? And the Brisa says the reason why the pasuk says a razor is to tell you that at the end of the term of the Nazirus, there's a halacha that the Nazir has to shave at that point in time. So at that point of time, the shaving should be done with a tar. And the Brisa said, why do we need a pasuk? Why can't we just learn it from Mitzorah? And the Brisa now is in the middle and says the reason why we can't learn that from Mitzorah is she'ein donin kalmei chamor lahachmer olav. You can't learn something lenient from something that is stricter to create a stringency. Meaning to say, by a Mitzorah, he actually has to shave his entire body. Unlike a Nazir, which is more lenient, he only shaves his head. And therefore, by Mitzorah, it is true that he has to use a tar, he has to use a razor, but we can't learn from Mitzorah to Nazir that a Nazir also has to use a razor, because that would be a stringency. And in general, Nazir is more lenient. The shaving's only on his head, it's not his entire body, and therefore that's why the Brisa said we have to learn it out from the pasuk, from the word tar in the pasuk, and not from Mitzorah. That's why the pasuk says tar. It's not because the prohibition of a Nazir shaving in general applies only by a tar, that's any kind of hair removal. It's because, again, the shaving that's done at the conclusion of the term, that needs to be with a razor. And the Brisa continues, Rebbe Omer, Rebbe says, Eino tzarech, it's not necessary. And what Rebbe means by Eino tzarech is that the Tanakama said that the word tar is an extra word, because really a Nazir is prohibited from shaving by any means, not only by a razor, but in any fashion. And therefore the extra word tar comes to say that at the completion of the term of the Nazirus, then the Nazir has to shave, and he specifically needs to use a razor, he specifically needs to use a tar. And Rebbe is saying you don't need any extra words. That's actually understood just from the simple reading of the pasuk, because because the pasuk says tar lo yavra al rosho, he's not allowed to use a razor on his head ad melos, until the completion of the term. HaTorah Amar, that's what the Torah is saying, achar melos, that at the completion of the term, lo tehetek lachas ela betar, that the shaving should be done specifically with a razor. But the Gemara says, according to Rebbe, still it's difficult. V'haksiv tar lo yavra al rosho, but the pasuk says also in terms of the prohibition that he's not allowed to use a razor. And so is Rebbe saying that the prohibition of shaving only applies to a razor also? If he's using the context of the pasuk to say that it has to be a razor at the completion of the term, so then the context of the pasuk also says that the violation, the prohibition, is only with a razor. And to that the Gemara says, no, lavar Allah b'shnei lavin. What Rebbe means is that the prohibition applies in terms of any hair removal. But if a person uses a razor, if the Nazir uses a razor, there's actually going to be two lavin, there's going to be a violation of two negative commandments. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Chisda says, Lilkos biachas, if a Nazir shaves even one hair, that's a violation and he's going to get malchus. La'akev b'shtayim, there's a halacha again that the Nazir has to shave at the completion of the term of his Nazirus, but if he leaves off two hairs, then he hasn't really fulfilled that obligation. And listor, let's say in terms of shaving, the halacha is that if he shaves, he has to start over the count, or make up the count. Eino soser ele barov rosho uvisar, so that only applies if he shaves the majority of his head, and he uses a razor. Only in those situations does he have to extend the Nazirus. The Gemara says, 1 second, b'tarin b'midi achrina lo, does that apply only with a razor and with nothing else? V'alkatani, but we learned, minayin l'rabos as kol ha'ma'avir, and we learned that anyway that the hair is removed. It doesn't have to specifically be with a razor. In any fashion that it's removed, it's going to be a violation. Ela'ema, rather, what Rav Chisda means to say is, ke'ein tar. It means that when we're talking about removal of the hair, it has to be that you're removing the hair fully, close to the skin, just like a razor. Only that's considered removal of the hair. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Nami Hachi, we learned in a Brisa like this as well. Nazir shetolash meirit sif kolshu, if a Nazir tears or uproots or pulls out any amount of hair, Eino soser, it's not going to negate the count that he did beforehand. He doesn't have to extend the Nazirus, Ela barov roshu v'sar, unless he does the majority of his head and he uses a razor. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, Keshem sheshtei saros ma'akvos bo, just like two hairs are ma'akev, meaning at the end of the term, if he shaves everything except for two hairs, that's not considered a fulfillment of the obligation to shave at the end of the term. Kach shtei saros sosros bo, so too two hairs, that's going to be enough to say that it negates what he counted, and he has to extend the Nazirus. And the Gemara continues, Tanan Hassam, we learned in a Mishnah over there, this is a Mishnah in Negoyim, Shlosha Megalchin v'teglachtan mitzvah, there are three people who shave, and their shaving is a mitzvah. Nazir, that's the Nazir at the end of his term, Umitzora and a Mitzora in the purification process shaves, Uleviim, and also the Leviim, when they were inaugurated into the Avod, into the Beis HaMikdash, they also had a mitzvah to shave. V'kulan shegilchu, in all of these cases, if they shave shelo besar, without a razor, o sheshayru shtei saros, or if they shave but they leave over 2 hairs, lo asu v'lo klum, so they haven't fulfilled any of their obligation. Amar Mar, the master said, Shlosha Megalchin v'tiglachtan mitzvah, 3 people that shave, and their shaving is a mitzvah. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Gemara says, Ma'u detema, what might you have thought, Mishum ivurei saru, that really the mitzvah is just to remove hair? Ve'afilu sach nashi, even let's say they use some kind of cream to remove the hair. Kamash malan, so it's teaching us, no, it has to be with a razor. Kamash malan delo, it's teaching us again, it's not good if it's not with a razor. Katani v'kulan shagilchu shelo besar, it says all of them, if they do it without a razor, then it's not a fulfillment of the obligation. B'shlom agabe nazir, I understand by nazir, ksiv, the pasuk says, tar lo yavra al rosho, it says the word tar. V'gabe leviim, ksiv, by the leviim, it says, ve'viru sar al kol besarim, also, it uses the word tar, it uses razor. El mitzora betar minolan, where's the source that a mitzora needs to use a razor? If you're going to say that we should learn it from the Leviim, just like by the Leviim, they require shaving and it has to be done with a razor. So too we should assume by Mitzora also he requires shaving and it has to be with a tar. But you can refute this limud. You can't really learn from Leviim because Leviim is unique. By the Leviim they also required waving of their bodies. Tomar b'Mitzora the low, by Mitzora that was not the case, so you can't necessarily learn from the Leviim. Elatesimi Nazir, so the Gemara says maybe we can learn from Nazir, but the Gemara says Nazir is also unique. Malin Nazir shekain karbono, to and lechem, when it comes to Nazir, so the carbon requires bread. Tomer b'Mitzora the low, when it comes to Mitzora, that's not the case. Elamechad lo asya, so you can't learn it out from one, meaning you can't learn Mitzora from Leviim alone, you can't learn from Nazir alone, so rather teisi mitarvein. Why? Let's learn it instead from the combination of the two of them. The Gemara says, Mehei Teisi, how should you learn it? Teisi mi Leviim, because if you try from the Leviim, Ma'ala Leviim, Shekein Te'unin Tenufa, like we said, Tenufa Begufan, the Leviim is unique because they require waving of their body. Nazir yochiach, but Nazir can show the other way because it doesn't require the tenufa begufan. And Mal Nazir shekain karbono ta'on lechem, and Nazir is also unique, like we said above, because it requires bread. Leviim yochichu, but Leviim proves the other way. So therefore, again, you see that's not the cause. That's not the reason why the tar is required. V'chazar adin, you go back and forth. Lo roizeh koroizeh, v'lo roizeh koroizeh. Each one is not like the other one. Hatzara shavash shebehem. What's the common denominator? Shein te'unin teglachas, that they both require shaving. V'teglachton betar, and the shaving must be done with a razor. Afani avias a mitzora, and so too we should include the mitzora. Shuto and teglachas, v'teglachto betar. He also should require shaving, and the shaving is with a razor. Amarle Rava mi Barnish lo Ravashi. Rava mi Barnish said to Ravashi, v'lifroch, we can refute this as well. Ma'alat tzara shavish behen shekain. What is unique about these two that we're trying to learn from? And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Omid Beis.